Hello, welcome back to the Parenting Connection Show. I'm your host, Dr. Tyra Hodge. Today in the studio, we have Sonja Meyrer.
Yep.
Close?
Close enough.
Okay. She is she's telling us about her new book, And Then You Went Missing. And I'm very excited about this. I wanted to hear, well, first, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to
I'm
be
so
here.
glad
It really
you're
is.
here. Um, you actually have had some good experiences about your kids going to public education.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that before we start talking about your book.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I was excited to be invited on the show because I went to public school. My kids, who are now adults, all went to public school. I was actually a public school teacher early on in my career, and
Oh,
we had great
wow.
experiences. Yeah. I
Okay.
worked in the LA Unified School District for 2 years
Oh,
at a
wow.
magnet school, and I found wonderful teachers. My kids had Christ-following leaders and teachers in their school, and yeah, they had the
Mm.
normal ups and downs, but
Mm.
I'm a big fan of the public school system. I think we can continue to improve and
Yeah,
support it.
of course, of course. Well, what's a magnet school?
So magnet school is a specialized school. There was a magnet school for international studies and foreign languages, and
Wow.
kids from anywhere in the district could take a bus and go there. So
Okay.
I had kids who drove an hour and a half in the morning to be at a school like that. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
amazing. So, let's look at your book.
Yeah.
And so, and then you went missing. A hope-filled guide for anyone lost in a difficult relationship. Tell us a little bit about this.
I actually think the cover really shares the whole story. So I believe that we are all given gifts and talents from
Mm,
God and a light to shine. And what happens is when we're in difficult relationships, and that can be anything from
mhm,
a work relationship, it could be in ministry, it could be in a romantic or in a personal relationship with our kids. Sometimes other people's issues fill in the blank: addictions, mental illnesses,
wow.
stresses in their life, big personalities. They
Mhm.
just kind of can cover us up and shroud us. And
Yes.
so, as Christ followers, and I want to say, especially as women, sometimes we struggle with knowing what it means to love and care and support to the point where we disappear. So,
Mm.
this is a little bit of my
So
journey. And yeah,
parents have, I mean,
very
that
difficult.
happens,
Yeah,
as a parent, you just kind of disappear into this role of being a parent.
yeah.
And then when it's gone, you're like, what's next? And so,
Yeah.
um, how how is your own life journey reflected in this
Yeah.
writing?
So I met Jesus when I was 17, and that
Okay.
really changed my life. It didn't change my trajectory entirely. I knew I wanted to be a teacher and I wanted to one day have a family, but it really changed the way I felt about myself. And still, I came out of my childhood as a people pleaser and a yes sayer. That was part of the journey that I learned to sort of survive.
Mm,
So in life, I had a very difficult time. I was really good at morphing into everything everybody needed me to be, but I found it very difficult to stand up for myself. And I was in an alcoholic marriage, someone who also struggled with depression, suicidal
mm.
ideation, who unfortunately later did take his life. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
the kids and I
Mm,
watched the journey, and we had to learn how to support and love someone who was struggling. And anyone who does life with someone who's struggling with addiction or mental illness knows, we always say, you get some on you. You can't help but worry and obsess. But when that gets to the point where you can't sleep at night, you don't have your own thoughts anymore, it's devastating. And so I went into the field of coaching. I was in ministry for a long time, worked with
mm.
a lot of parents and families who especially have kids that they worry about and just don't know what to do, don't know how to sleep at night, don't know how to live their own life anymore.
It is so hard. That is so hard.
Yeah.
Why do Christians especially seem to struggle with the codependency
Yeah.
and unhealthy relationships?
So codependency is a word that gets kind of thrown around out there. And
Yeah.
I don't think everybody always uses it correctly. So I've heard people
So what's
say,
your definition
so
of it
my
first?
definition
Mhm.
is two things. It's when we let somebody else's behavior control us and we are obsessed about controlling them. So this idea that if I could only get him to fill in the blank, and we do this with our kids, right? If I could
Mhm,
only get him to want to go to school, if I could only get him to be happier, it's this idea that we are in charge of someone else's happiness and life, and all of our brain power goes towards wanting to fix them.
Right.
And the way I love to describe it
And
is, yeah,
then when we can't fix them, we put that on ourselves, like I'm not enough,
right,
or
right,
I'm not, they wouldn't do it for me,
yeah, yeah.
and so.
And it's like you're going on a roller coaster ride with someone whose life is kind of going like this, and you kind of strap yourself in. And
Mhm.
so when they're happy, you're happy. And when they're
Mhm.
not happy and not doing well, gosh, I don't have permission now either. And what happens is we just sort of dissolve into that person's life. And so the work and the book is all about how do we learn how to remove ourselves from somebody else's drama and continue to love and support them, but in a godly way. And in my experience with the Bible, Jesus is really good about setting boundaries.
Mhm.
He's not a pushover. He's not a yes sayer. And I think we get confused as Christian women about our job. How far do we have to go to love and care? Oh, and by the way, what does it really mean to love someone? Does that mean we indulge everything they want? Does that mean we give in and we enable them? So we have to ask ourselves, where am I doing someone else a disservice in all of this?
This is good. This is good. So, talk about
Yeah.
boundaries.
So I have clients that will come to me and they say, I can't set boundaries. That's mean. That's hard. Or, people will get in an argument and they'll stand up and they'll say, I'm setting a boundary with you. And I always say, well, that's just sort of a temper tantrum. It's not really a boundary. So a boundary by definition is, so we know in the physical world what a boundary is. Our
Mhm.
skin is our boundary, and there are fences and there are, things that keep us
Mhm.
from going onto somebody else's property. And the same is true with our spiritual and our mental world, and that is there are limits to what we are going to allow someone else to do or say in our presence. And so a boundary simply says, that's not okay with me,
Mhm.
and if that continues, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to remove myself. So I think of the simple example. If you get in a car with someone and they're texting while they're driving, and that's not okay with you, and you ask them to stop, and they just, that's not interesting to them.
Right.
It's my job to say, hey, this is not okay with me. I'm going to get out and find a new solution.
Mhm.
That's a simple example. But a boundary can be everything from, hey, mom, when you constantly critique my parenting, that hurts and that's not okay with me. And so if
Mm.
you do it again, I'm going to divert the conversation. So, there's simple boundaries that we set. There are extreme boundaries that we set with someone who might be struggling with addiction, where we say, okay, this is what it's going to take for me to stay in a relationship with you.
Mm.
And, if you're not willing to get treatment, I respect that, but here's what I'm going to do to
Mhm.
protect myself from behaviors.
Right.
So,
Wow, see that doing that could actually change a lot of outcomes for people. Tell me about how does the coaching work with you?
yeah. So I was in ministry for many years, and what I found was because I had this journey myself, people would come to me,
Mhm.
talk to me. What is
Mhm.
it like? They were in romantic relationships. They had kids who were struggling, um, families who were struggling, and I was just sort of informally kind of coaching people. And at some point, I talked to my one of my supervisors and I said, I think God's really pushing me to do this professionally. So coaching is a little bit like counseling. I work in a counseling center actually, but it's a little more forward thinking. So if I have a family that comes and says, I'm really struggling with the child, what we do is we really strategize. Okay,
Mhm.
what are the behaviors you're seeing? What are the resources that are available to you so that you can help your child? And what are some very concrete next steps that you want to pursue? So we're very much about setting goals and moving forward at a pace that's comfortable for them.
Wow.
And that's kind of why I wrote this book, because in ministry, I would find that well intentioned leaders and pastors would coach someone and they'd say, you just need to go and set some boundaries with that person and go and say no. And this person who has no experience, who's terrified, they kind of get the courage to do that. And then it backfires because
Mm.
they just sort of melt in the response and then they come back and feel worse. And so I always said, we need to do a little bit better job up front. We need to help people, first of all, understand that you have an identity and you were given gifts and talents.
Mm-hmm.
And we know from the parables, your job is not to hide yourself.
Right.
You need to flourish and kind of do your job,
Wow.
right,
Yeah.
in the kingdom. So from that, we need to know, well, what is it that matters to us? What's important? What are my deal breakers? My godly deal breakers, not
Mm-hmm.
money, but
Mm-hmm.
things like honesty.
Mm-hmm.
That matters to me in any relationship. Respect matters to me. And those things I'm not going to let someone rob me of. No matter how much I love them, I'm not going to submit myself to
Right.
ungodly behaviors. So once we know that, then we can do the work of setting boundaries a little better. A little
This
better.
is
I still struggle
good.
myself.
This is
So
good. Um, so tell me, what are some of your favorite chapters in the book?
yeah. So the most difficult chapter in the book is the very first tool, and it's about acceptance.
Okay.
Because I think what we often struggle with in relationships, and this is especially true with kids, is acknowledging the truth about the way somebody is and their motivation for change or their lack of motivation. I see parents all the time who want their kid to be a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
He's just got to be the athlete, or he's got to be the scholar, he's got to behave. And then they come home from school and they have purple in their hair, or they have a nose piercing, or they failed a class. And the parent feels so despondent about what's going on that the reaction is just really hard hitting.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to take them back a step and say, okay, so what were you expecting? Well, this is the image you had. This is the script you wrote for that kid.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's not what's happening right now. So
Right.
can we just look at the truth? Now, can we go back and say, is it that big of a deal? And if it is, okay, then let's start moving towards setting some boundaries with that child. But reacting that way and shaming a child because of something they're doing that you don't agree
Right.
with. I mean, you know that from being in schools and being around
Mm-hmm.
families. That's the most destructive thing you can do
Yes,
for a
sir.
kid. So that's
Yeah.
the hardest chapter. But I think the chapter that I like the most is early up front when we talk about our values,
Okay.
because it's fun. It gives you a chance to think about like your feelings and your emotions and how you
Yeah.
react and what really matters to you.
Hmm. We'll speak a little bit to emotional intelligence.
Yes, thank you. This is one thing I'm really grateful for in the schools, is that they are starting young with teaching kids a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
about their feelings and their emotions and not stuffing everything. So
Mm-hmm.
if we're going to learn to be healthy in a relationship, it starts with knowing ourselves. It starts with introspection. And I can't tell you how many people I meet who are older than me who have never done that work before, who know nothing about themselves. So
Okay.
when we know how we're wired, there are some assessments you can take out there. There's the Enneagram and things like that, but you don't even have to really do anything formal. If you start to learn how you feel about things, so you can print out one of those feelings wheels that are online. I made my kids take them to college and they all rolled their eyes just to identify, how do I react to things? What makes me really agitated? What makes me sad? And being able to identify that, then we can get better in a relationship at communicating. So if there's
Right.
someone in my life who's hurt me, I can come and instead of saying, you're a jerk, I can say, that comment you made me feel criticized. It made me feel belittled. I'm going to ask you not to do that again. That's a whole different conversation,
Right.
right? Than when we just let our emotions run wild. So raising your emotional intelligence is huge in relationships, because when you know yourself, you can empathize with someone else.
Right.
But if you don't know how you're wired, and if you're not any good at listening, it's going to be almost impossible to really do well in relationships.
Wow. Okay. Miss Sonia, talk to our guests and give them some more inspiration,
Yeah.
and what are the final things, and also where can they get your book?
Gladly. So I know that there are people listening. I've never met someone who hasn't struggled in this area. So if you're in a relationship where you feel like you're just over your head, somebody who pushes your buttons, somebody where you walk on eggshells around them, where you just feel like your life is being put on hold, I believe that that's not the way God wants you to live. And that doesn't mean we abandon the people we love. It simply means we go back to understanding that we were also created for a purpose, and maybe get some professional help. Maybe grab the book. There's some really practical tools in there, and there's questions at the end. So if you wanted to do this as a book study, this can be a lot of fun, just, with your girlfriends or in a Bible study group, is to really learn and encourage each other, because it's hard to do this on our own. But when you have other friends that are
Yes.
saying, hey, you got this, and I'm going to
Yes.
pray for you today, and let me know how it turned out, that makes it so much better. So the book is available on Amazon, and it's on Barnes & Noble. My website is sonjamcoaching.com, and I'd love to hear from you too, and get connected with you.
Sonja, thank you so much for being on the
Thank you for having
show.
me. It was a
All
pleasure.
right, we'll talk soon.
Okay.